Hello and welcome back to the Craft Mansion. In today's video I show you how I made Thor's costume from Endgame. I've always been fascinated with superhero costumes. In fact, last year I made Doctor Strange costume. It's this one over here. But I don't have the exact physique of a superhero. So, Thor from Endgame gave me the exact opportunity I needed. Fat Thor. Of course he is still muscular, he has huge arms, but I can fake them out later. So first, let's play the intro, and then we can continue with the video. I don't want to be stuck at the gym for a year for this costume, so I can fake some muscles. I'm going to start with this long-sleeved top, and then build my muscles from this foam. And then to cover different muscles, a pair of tights. I have some reference pictures over here for Thor's muscles and some real muscles. So I can start with the basic three. This one over here, bicep and the tricep. And I'm just going to draw them out first so I can plan them on the top. Then I roughly copied those patterns onto the foam. Once I had all my patterns, I cut around them and made sure to leave a little extra foam on the edges, just in case I needed to increase the muscle size. I started planning the rounded shape of the muscles, marking the edges where the foam needed to be carved out the most, and drawing the top circle shaping the thickest part of the muscle. Since the muscles need to fit around my arm, I also carve out the back of the foam to the shape of my arm. As I go along, I try the muscles on myself to get the best shape when carving the dome. Using a pair of scissors, I round out the edges created by the blade. This muscle needs to be a bit bulkier, so I'm just going to glue some pieces with some foam glue. So now I have my first set done, the top one, then the ones that go on the sides, and then I also finished another one that goes over here. I've got my left muscles over here, and the right ones over here. I poured glue over the edge and then some in the middle, and held the foam in place for about 5 to 10 minutes until it dried. Then I took off the top and cut down some of the foam where the muscle felt too bulky. Glue on its own won't hold the foam down to the fabric, especially when I'm using the costume and bending my arms, so I sewed the edges flat to the top. The muscles are finished. I think they're pretty good, and they're quite on there because they're sewn on. And as you can see, there are 4 in total, 4 over here and then 4 over here. So now it's time to cover them. So I have these black tights, and first I need to cut through the middle. Then I also cut off the toes. Well, not my toes, I still have 10 toes. I cut off the toes from the sock. Anyways, I covered all the muscle using the tights, and now, as I'm recording this voiceover, I'm really jealous of my on-screen self. I mean, I have all those muscles. Like this, they already look a bit better. So I'm just excited at the fact that for once I have some extra body weight, and it's not just fat. It's actually muscle. Anyways, so now the next thing to do is to stitch these onto the top, even the grooves between the muscles. So I'm just going to take this off. I do need to take off the microphone. I grabbed my black thread and lined all the muscles, so as to define them more. I threaded the needle all the way through the tights, foam and shirt to make sure everything stayed in place. When I had sewn on the ends, I cut off the excess fabric. There's no particular pattern I had when sewing. I'm no expert, I just went along with what felt most natural and would yield the strongest result. Now the last layer to go on the arms are the scales. So in the picture there are these rectangular diamond-shaped scales, which I'm going to make from EVA foam. Now I don't need the larger ones, I just need smaller pieces because all the scales are small. So I marked till where the scales should go, and then I started laying a basic pattern on which to stick the foam. It seemed easy at first, but a 3D surface deemed to be more difficult and more time consuming, resulting in me refraining to do more costumes as detailed as this one in the future. It's too much. I have this scrap piece of VA foam, and I'm going to start with this strap over here. I opted to use larger strips of EVA foam rather than small bits to maintain the linear structure of the scales. I designed each scale by marking the foam to match the pattern underneath, and then cutting the individual scales. I poured a plentiful amount of all-purpose glue, and then started the highway to hell that was the whole process behind the scales. I had originally bought 1 glue tube. Yeah, I went back for 3 more. And the hands are done. This is the reason it took me 3 to 4 weeks to upload this video. These alone took 2 weeks. Over where I need to bend the arms, I have some space left. I didn't fill these in with foam, so it'll be more flexible to bend the arms. So now it's time to paint them all in black. I spray painted the arms in black and dry brushed silver to highlight the edges of the scales, and also give it a little shine. Dry brushing is a technique in which you dab the brush in a small amount of paint, wipe most of it away, and then go over the areas you want to highlight. Now I've printed some pictures for the rest of the costume, and I'm going to continue with the chest plate. The plan is to use this yoga mat. Let's see if it's strong enough. And then of course, EVA craft foam. This is 2 millimeters, and this will be used to create the smaller details. Let's open this up. I printed a full-scale image of the chest plate from the picture you see on the bottom left. I only printed one side so I could flip the template to create a symmetric copy. I marked all the lines I needed and used an official image for more reference. The original picture is not made for a 2D template, unfortunately, so as you can see, the further away I got from the middle, the more I strayed from the original image. Once I had finished all the lines, I transferred the whole image onto cardstock. I also added the straps that would go around me and attach at the back. All the parts were assigned a number to show on which layer they were going to be, 1 being the base of the yoga mat. You can get this template in image form for reference, as I couldn't scan the whole thing, by contacting me on my Facebook page or Instagram account, the craft mentioned, so I can email it to you. I transferred the whole template onto the yoga mat to have a base. Then I flipped it to complete the front part. I cut the excess foam and glued the straps in place, using the same all-purpose glue, but since foam is not as porous like fabric, I applied it to both sides and let it dry before attaching both parts together. To continue with the other layers, I cut off all parts with one on them, and then copied the rest onto EVA foam. Since I couldn't find foam large enough to cover the whole area, I split the template into pieces to cover all parts that range from layers 2 to 4. Then I cut the foam because, well, that's the next step, I guess. The top part of the chest plate consists of a level 2 layer that overlaps layers 3 and 4. So I have 2 different parts in different shapes covering the same area. You will see this later on in the video where I show you the actual foam. Some areas have lines that belong on the same layer, so I traced them to cut them later on. So now I've finished all of my foam cuttings. Now I need to make the border around the arms. So I'm using these foam tubings. I know from where I got them, they were just there. And I need to cut these through the middle. I traced the areas which needed to be covered with the foam tubing, and of course, my biro stopped working. Once I had the desired thickness, I rounded the foam. For some reason I didn't film the part where I glued on the foam, but basically I used super glue to hold the tubing in place. To cover the foam, I cut a strip of EVA, which I glued on using the all-purpose glue, by applying to both sides and then pressing them together once dry. Then, of course, I glued it all the way to the back, leaving a large enough area on which both foams can stick to one another. I slightly cut into these lines over the shoulder to copy the ones in the picture. To stick all layers together, I used contact glue, which uses the same technique as the all-purpose. And if you haven't noticed by now, I forgot the camera strap in the frame because that's me. I'm an idiot. Now let us reflect on the fact that in this next shot, not only had I left the strap hanging, but I also stopped it from moving so I could start filming, before actually realizing it should not be there at all. To stop the EVA from sticking all at once, I covered most of the glued area with paper and then removed them along as I pressed both layers together. Remember those lines I mentioned earlier that belong on the same layer? Yeah, I'm cutting them right now. In the middle of the chest there is a long part. And I made it from floor mat foam as this needed to stand out. so I made a V-cut through the middle and then glued it in shape. The glitter hot glue wasn't me just trying to be fancy, it was actually some glue left from a previous project. So don't waste glitter glue in areas like this, please. Don't waste it. Then I flattened the edges and glued it in place using contact glue. To make those 6 discs on the front, I glued several circular layers of EVA, gradually decreasing the diameter to acquire a dome shape. Then I applied contact glue and covered the layers with a smaller circle than the bottommost one to leave a flat edge around the whole thing. More contact glue, and I slapped all 6 discs in place. This is what I was saying about a layer 2 part overlapping layers 3 and 4. So I glued this layer as if it was a layer 5, but then brought it back to a layer 2 along the shoulders. Using a Dremel tool, I flattened all layers to create a crisp, solid edge. To create the rectangular grooves on the discs, I used a wood engraver on low heat, trying not to burn my hand along the way. I burnt my finger as soon as I switched it on, of course. Once all parts were in place, I switched on my heat gun and went over all areas to heat seal the foam, and most importantly, to open up the areas which I had cut earlier. To attach the straps at the back, I used Velcro, so I needed to create an area to which the Velcro could stick. So, on one side, I glued on a strip of EVA foam, wide enough to host the Velcro and also have enough area to be glued onto the yoga mat. Before I painted the chest plate, I bent it in shape by heating the foam and keeping it in place until it cooled down. I had some black cloth lying around and I used it to cover the space between the bottom and middle straps. Using contact glue, I glued the cloth in place. Then I also glued the Velcro in place with the spiky side on the EVA foam and the fuzzy side on the back of the yoga mat. I dry brushed some silver in selected areas to bring out the different layers of foam. Another technique I like to use, and if you have seen my previous videos, you know I use this quite a lot, is adding water to black paint and then painting over all the grooves and cuts and wiping the excess away to leave a darkening effect. The discs are darker, so I dry brushed some black paint. Then, to create the design on these discs, I crumpled a piece of paper, painting the edges with plenty of silver, and then dabbed the paper on the disc. I masked around it just to make sure no paint went outside the area. The design is sort of like lightning, I guess. It's random, so I opted for this method to create a random pattern. And since they are shinier than the rest of the chest plate, I added a coat of Mod Podge to really get that effect. The next part will be the wape. The next part is the cape. I started by sketching the design of the cape cover on a rough piece of paper. I stuffed a pillow inside the suit so I could keep it in shape, and then I designed the actual template. Then I transferred the template onto cardstock, having only half the whole thing as it can easily be flipped to create symmetrical sides. I scanned this template and all that follow, and you can get them by contacting me on either Facebook or Instagram. I copied the base layer on EVA foam, but one sheet wasn't enough, so I split it into 2 and attached the parts with contact glue. Once all 3 layers were cut, I glued everything in place. I heat sealed the foam and then opened those cuts in the middle. While the foam was still warm, I also bent it in shape. I also designed the template for the collar, cut both layers, glued them, cut the lines on the other part, heat sealed it, dry brushed the outer part with silver, and finally glued it to the rest of the back. The back has the same color as the chest plate, having a base coat of black and then a light spray of grey. For the actual cape, I used red fabric, so first I had some help to measure the length and width, and then to make the seam finish, so as to prevent the fabric from fraying. To attach the cape to the cover, I started by pinning down the fabric to the foam. Then, I marked the areas where I needed to apply glue with a silver marker. I applied the glue, and once dry, I attached the foam to the fabric. Now that the cape is ready, I have to attach it to the rest of the suit. And I have So first I need to mark the areas where the Velcro should go. Should be somewhere about here. I glued on the Velcro, having the spiky side on the suit and the fuzzy side on the cape. Next up were the arm braces, so I designed the template. I had one base layer that goes around my arm, and the other 3 were only for the front. In the middle, there is a part similar to the long one in the middle of the chest plate, so I used the same technique. Hot glue held it in shape, and once cooled, I flattened the edges with a Dremel tool. These are the 5 different parts for the piece that goes on the outer side of the arm brace. This first part is black cardstock, while the rest is all EVA foam. The cardstock goes below the first layer, and then using super glue I stuck the 3D layer in the middle. Using contact glue, I attached layers 1 and 2, making sure not to cover the middle bit. After I attached the last layer, I sanded the edges down to appear solid. I created the small notch at the narrow end and cut the line that goes through the middle. The back layer starts halfway through the front part so that the cut can be hidden. I spray painted them in black and then dry brushed silver on the front part. To create fake straps with which the front part is attached, I cut 2 strips of EVA foam, the short one being 1.3 cm in thickness and the longer one 1.5 cm in thickness. I heat sealed them and then dry brushed them with silver. The short one goes from the narrow end and starts from the side, while the longer strips goes on the wider end and goes over the whole thing. I darkened up the deeper areas with watered down black paint and wiped off the excess. These are the knee pads. These parts all have the same repeated steps, starting off with a template and ending up with both layers of foam. For the bottom layer, I had to cut 40 lines, which, as you can guess, took a lot of patience. Some more glue, some sanding, and some heating. Here you can notice how quickly the lines open up. It's like a real life time lapse. It's quite fascinating. More spray paint and dry brushing. The shin guards also have 2 layers. As opposed to the knee pads, the upper layer of the shin guard is in the middle and not on the edge. Like the chest and the back, I spray painted these in black and then gave them a light grey. The shin guards are done. The knee pads are done. So what we need now is something to attach them onto. These are some old pants of mine. In fact, they do have a lot of holes. And I will be attaching them using contact glue, of course, because that's what I do. But also using some elastic band, just so they can keep tight around my leg. This, what will we be using it for? Well, I'll tell you. So, on the side of the pants, there's also this pattern. It's a diamond pattern. I won't be using foam again because that took too long. So I plan on making my pattern from this plastic cover thing, I don't know what it's called. First I measured the area I needed to cover and cut the plastic accordingly. I marked the patterns of diamonds to have a grid of 10 by 5. So I have a better idea. Instead of cutting these all separately, I'll use one whole thing and then using a biro and a ruler, just scoring along the lines, and that would save me a lot of trouble. So I pressed along the lines and then folded the plastic. I peeled off the back and attached it to the pants. I also added some all-purpose glue on the edges for a stronger grip. The costume is finished, but I'm not a blonde, so I have a wig. It's not that similar, I need to make it more brown. And I have a beard. After I bought it I realized this one won't work exactly, but it's the one I got, so I have to use this one. I also bought these 2 hairsprays. One is brown and one is golden. I think this one's brown. And I can color my eyebrows. Directions for use: holding the can upright, spray in short bursts from a distance of 20 centimeters, avoiding face and eyes. I'm so fancy! This needs to be shorter, so... Now let's test this hair color spray thingy and see if it works. I made a mess, but I'm going to cheat and add a little normal spray paint, some brown. Yeah, well, this isn't working, and I'm going to bleach my eyebrows like Thor in Thor 1, so I'm going to have to leave my brown eyebrows. And the costume is finally ready. So here we have the main part. This is my favorite. It's the chest plate, the cape, the trousers, the arms, the wrist braces, and finally the wig and beard. And I know these are not the same color, but I try to make them as close as possible. So now it's time for the epic montage of dressing up. Let's go. And the costume is finally done. So I can say that I am the god of hammers. Well, I could be the god of hammers. But these aren't right. You know what might be right? Mjolnir and Stormbreaker, which might just be the next 2 projects. So stay tuned for more. This has been one of my most ambitious projects yet. But now I can say it's finally done. And we can move on to the next one. I have a lot more projects on my channel. So don't forget to like this video and you can leave a little comment. You can also see how I made Captain America's shield. Until then, I am David, or rather Thor, and this is the craftsmanship. Wait, before you leave, I will have a stall at the Malta Maker Faire, and you can come and see some of my projects in person. That was annoying. I guess this event is only for people who live in Malta, so anyone who doesn't live in Malta, just you can leave. I'm still waiting. I'm kidding, of course. The event will be held at the MFCC Ta Qali between Friday 27th March and Sunday 29th March. So come and pay a visit, bring your friends, bring your family, bring your kids if you have kids. I don't know what the rules are about pets. I will leave a link down in the description and I'll see you there. And my costume fell.